in my perspective, at one of those panels where they read your biography, and so they actually put you in a panel that you address intelligently. I do not know enough about my colleagues on the panel to know their qualifications, so they will explain it to you, starting with Chris at the end.
Well, I founded Changing the Times, which was an online art and history magazine, and I've actually written a number of art and history books along the way. So that's my qualifications.
Okay, I'm Steve White. So far I've had 22 science fiction and fantasy novels published. Excuse me. I'm best known for the military history. There's novels of the Starfire series that I co-authored with David Weber and more recently with Charles Gannon. However, I've written a number of solo novels in various subgenres, including time travel. And just a little tasteless self-promotion, I currently have a time travel novel, Ghosts of Time, in the bookstores, and the next one in the series, which will be number 6, Soldiers Out of Time, will be coming out later this year. I've occasionally been able to slip a little alternate history past Toni Weisskopf at Bain into my work. I haven't been able to sell her on letting me write a straight alternate history novel because she seems to think I can't do that without falling into the temptation of lecturing people about history. I don't know where people get their ideas.
Okay, and I'm Lou Antonelli. I had a story that was a Sidewise Award finalist in 2013, which is the Alternate History Award. Didn't win, but I was beaten fairly. I was beaten by a better man. Better story. It was called Great White Ship. It was published in Daily Science Fiction in 2012, and it's the lead-off story in the collection that was published last year by Fantastic Books called The Clock Struck None, which is a collection of alternate history and secret history stories. I've had 92 short stories published in 12 years, so I have 3 collections. I have a Hugo-nominated short story this year. It's not alternate history. And the best related work category, I have this book called Letters from Gardner, which explains how I broke into writing and sold the last story that Gardner Dozois bought before he retired. You can make of that what you will. I'm a journalist by profession. I've been a journalist all my life. I will, tomorrow afternoon, be back at my job at the county seat newspaper in Red River County, Texas. So I automatically seemed to have segued when I started writing science fiction over a decade ago into alternate history, because there's the old saying that journalism is the first rough draft of history. So I seem to naturally have a propensity. I write alternate histories to sound realistic and believable, so that seemed to work. So I think I can address this subject. Okay, what's the alternate history in science fiction and fantasy? This is a catch-all for that subject, so I don't know where we should start. You have the most experience, so you seem to write
well, first of all, to me, well, first of all, let's define alternate history versus secret history. Alternate history presupposes that, say, Hitler won World War II. Secret history does not. It presumes that recorded history, what the history we all know actually happened, but that behind the scenes there's been a Nazi underground living in a great cavern underneath Antarctica ever since the official end of World War II, which has been, which is secretly running the world from behind the scenes and has a base on the moon and yada, yada, yada. Now, as for alternate history, to me there are 2 kinds of alternate history. One that I would call pure alternate history simply takes as its starting point that the South won the Civil War or the Spanish Armada carried it off or whatever, and proceeds from that point. And the second kind is actually a blend of alternate history and time travel. This is the type of alternate history that supposes that if you have time travel, the time travelers can go back and change the past. So the actual process of creating the alternate history becomes what's driving the plot. Typically, the conflict involves the effort to change the past, or more often to prevent the bad guys from changing the past. Now, pure alternate history, and I sort of have a bee in my bonnet about this. Everybody considers it a subgenre of science fiction. This is the universal opinion. It seems to me it ought to be considered a subgenre of historical fiction. In fact, a great deal of historical fiction, in my opinion, is actually slightly alternate history. The Sherlock Holmes stories presuppose a world in which there was this brilliant detective in Victorian London combating a criminal mastermind named Moriarty. the George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman novels presuppose a world in which there was a British Army officer named Harry Flashman who caused the charge of the Light Brigade because the night before he had been drinking Russian champagne and had such noisy flatulence that it enraged his commanding officer, so that he was even less capable of rational thought than usual.
Well, Grace, what's our
I'm serious,
definition?
read it.
You're great. Leaving out the gassy parts, what's your definition?
Well, I would start alternate history just being a single change in the timeline. Like you said, the South running the Civil War. But we could always take it back and say the South won at Gettysburg, therefore the South won the Civil War. I wouldn't include the Flashman or the other book you mentioned as pure alternate history. I'd class more as secret history by your definition. Alternate history books, pure alternate history books, as you were saying, start with this point and chart the change and go on from there. Or you can use this as a setting for another book. For example, you could write a book set in 1950 after 15 years of German occupation of the British Isles. That wouldn't cover the change in history itself, but the set in the world you made, if that makes sense. Added to this, there's also fantasy elements you bring in. So if you get magic in 1830, which you might have written about, the world you have is not the world we know today, and it literally cannot be.
I kind of agree with Steve here that alternate history is kind of like, they say science fiction gives you the opportunity to explore ideas and scientific ideas. Alternate history gives you the opportunity to explore ideas about what if, what things might have happened differently in history. Got a question from the audience.
I hate to interrupt, but I had my head down while you were deciding who's the moderator, and I need to make a note about that. Who's moderating? Okay.
Yeah, it's Pushy Captain.
Okay. I can't read your name quite from here.
Gardner Joshua. It's Lou Antonelli.
Okay.
That's why they give us these things.
I got it.
Does anyone want the lights turned back on?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I thought were they turned down for a reason?
Yeah, there was like a video that we were watching.
The last one on the building.
Ah, there we go.
Now, I also may segue into alternate history because, of course, the United States, alternate history is always about the Civil War. Okay? In Europe, it's always about World War II. Now, my parents immigrated from Europe after the World War II. They were Italian, this I lost. Now, admittedly, ostensibly, my grandfather shouldn't have had much fear of reprisals since he was just a meager little tailor. However, he was the Mussolini family tailor. So, yeah.
So he was responsible for those god-awful uniforms.
Well, no, he was the guy that the German occupiers asked to sew the secret pockets for conveying the documents that the spies were using. So when his side lost, and he wasn't just...
There's a novel here.
Yeah, well, the thing was, he really was up to his armpits in it. So, but anyhow, so it's kind of... My mother was actually present when they strung up Mussolini. She lived in Milan. She went, hey, get to see how his career ended. The old saying about dictators, it's a great lifestyle, but the retirement plan sucks. And of course, I always hear those stories. And I know my mother was there actually at the event because she didn't pay attention to the dictator, but he was shot with his girlfriend. He tried to flee with him. And my mother was 14, she's a young lady, and when you hang a woman upside down as a skirt, her skirt fell over her face, and she had her panties out. And my mother thought, how undignified. You're dead, and you're being, undignified. Now, you won't see those pictures because after a while somebody got up on a ladder and tied her skirt around her knees. But my mother remembers seeing that, so that's why I knew she was there. It's like, it's worse than being dead, and there's also limits to loyalty. It's pretty funny because many years later, in a town I lived in, I ran and was elected to a local school committee. And then I ran for re-election and I didn't win. And I called my mom and says, well, the election's over, Mom. I don't get to serve a second term. I lost. And she said, are you going to be okay? You sounded worried. I said, no, Mom, United States. They don't shoot you and hang you from the gas station when you lose an election. I'm sorry. I'm okay. I'm better than okay.
At least we try not to make a habit of it.
Yeah.
Now, one exception to what you just said about how it's always about World War II in Europe. In Britain, I've noticed a favorite alternate history timeline changer is what if the Spanish Armada had carried it off. Now, you read a lot